We are delighted today to have Dr. Eve Armstrong from the New York Institute of Technology. I stumbled upon her talk because, like many of you, get emails from favorite places we've been and the times we've enjoyed very much visiting New York City and going to the Museum of Natural History. I'm on their email list. And when I saw, I think it was maybe back in December, that Dr. Armstrong was giving this talk, I thought, oh my gosh, creative patterns in nature sounds exactly like something that sounds particularly cool to me, and sounds like it would be something that would be of interest to RiverArts as well. So before we get started, we often start with just a quote or two. And I found a couple today that I liked. Rachel Carson, some of nature's most exquisite handiwork is on a miniature scale, as anyone knows who's applied a magnifying glass to a snowflake. And that one definitely spoke to me this week, since we have had snow on and off finally this year. And I enjoyed these others as well. I think there are a lot of great minds thinking in about creative processes and patterns in nature. And one of the things I thought was particularly cool about Dr. Armstrong was not only is she a fantastic physicist and researcher and professor, but she works in musical theater. She is really empowered and impassioned about sharing scientific knowledge through other means of communication, whether it's theater or just really good, scientific outreach. So I appreciate her being here. And Dr. Armstrong, I will let you tell us a little bit more about your background and the actual physics part of the research. And then thank you for talking about creative patterns in nature today.
Thank you, Anne, for inviting me. Thank you all of you for coming. I am going to skip a summary of my research because it's kind of it's basically what my presentation is about today anyway. So let me jump right into that. And can I share my screen with you?
Yes, I should have enabled sharing already, hopefully.
I can do it. Do you all see two images with the title saying pattern formation across neuroscience and astrophysics? Great. Yes. Okay. I should start by asking all of you, I think I said this a few minutes ago, but some of you have shown up since then. Please interrupt me at any time, especially in this COVID environment. I've been lamenting how hard it is to convey information to an audience when they're quiet and I have no idea what they're thinking. So mid-sentence, whatever, interrupt me. I should be in full screen mode now. Do you see it bigger now? Okay, great. So my research spans astrophysics and neuroscience. I started in astrophysics as an undergraduate at age 18, and I started dabbling in neuroscience as a postdoctoral researcher about 6 years ago. And as I began to learn more and more about neuroscience, I began to draw more and more parallels between the astrophysics that I had already learned and this new topic that I was beginning to learn. Specifically, structures and the formation of structures in these very seemingly disparate fields. So my first two images I want to show you probe, there we go. The question, which of these two images is a snapshot of neurons in a brain? And which of them is a network of matter in the universe? And I just want to draw and I'm not going to give you the answer yet, you can guess, but I won't give you the answer to the very, very end. I want to draw your attention to, I'm going to just describe the structure that I see over here on the left. I see some clumps of, I'm going to call it stuff, to not give away which is which. There's a clump here, there's a kind of a cluster over here. Then there are regions where there doesn't seem to be much happening. A black, I'll call it maybe a void of nothingness over here, another patch of little going on over here. And then these kind of arm-like, graceful kind of extensions from one cluster to another. Can you see my cursor as I'm moving it around?
Yes.
Great, so there's an extension coming up from this one, arcing over this way. And then meanwhile, there's an extension from this one arcing over here. And it seems like the two arms, or the fingers from the arms are meeting somehow. And then on the right side, you see something similar. There are black areas. Oh, sorry, I'll start with the light greenish areas, or there's a little red dot and a yellow dot over here, are areas of kind of enhanced stuff going on. And then there's black voidy regions. And then again, arm-like connections among them. So I'm kind of struck by the juxtaposition here. So that's why I began the talk this way. So let's dig a little deeper. Let me ask, well, first of all, let's back up. What's a network? Describing a network in the most general term possible. You know, not specialized into a specific field. Anyone want to throw out a definition?
I'd say connections.
Yeah, that's what the word I was going to use.
Okay, great. I threw out a couple possibilities here too. Yeah, a web connections, map of communication flow. I got a lot of these words from, I gave a talk kind of like this to a bunch of 12 to 15-year-olds, and they offered me up these words. Okay, great, fine. Let's dig in a little deeper now. Let's start with the neuronal network. Okay. A network of neurons, very small, tiny group of neurons, and I'll show you a schematic of that in a moment, is able to create the electrical signals that underlie a stable human heartbeat. I'm going to show you, this is going to be a kind of a clunky, is this going to work? Hang on a second, let me exit full screen mode. You all have probably seen an electrocardiogram before, but just in the interest of being abundantly clear, let me share my full computer. I'm sorry, this is a pretty clunky way to do this. I just wanted to show you an EKG in real time. And what that is it's a time series of voltage measured at the surface of the heart. Just want to make it clear what I'm talking about. Let me go back to my full screen mode. Meanwhile, a network of matter in the universe also contains structures that display periodic activity. You might not think about it that way, but take a look at this solar system. Hang on, where's my solar system? There it is. In just a moment, you're going to see a disk forming out of a nebulous, previously nebulous cloud of interstellar dust. And you see at the center of this circular distribution, a very dense object forming. It's going to turn out to be a sun or a star. And the gas that's circulating around it is going to start clumping into planets. And you might not think about orbiting a solar system as generating pattern rhythmic activity, but think of the Earth orbiting the sun every 365 days. Ba-doom, 365 days, ba-doom, ba-doom, ba-doom. So that's the first analogy I'd like to put forth to you today. Let me go back to my slides. I tried to embed this in a very seamless manner. It did not work. So let's dig deeper now into the neural network. And again, I'm not telling you which image is which. Here's, just to remind you, here's the electrocardiogram. And how is it created? Let's talk about neurons. And forgive me if I don't mean to be too pedagogical here. I just don't want to assume that anyone here, I don't want to leave anyone behind. So I apologize if I seem like I'm talking at too low a level. I just don't know.
I appreciate it.
Okay, all right, good, thanks. So a neuron is an animal cell. A neuron is a building block of the central nervous system. And neurons receive sensory input from our environment, and then we respond to that environment, and this neuronal network controls every step in between. What we think about the stimulus, how our muscles respond to it, and the neurons communicate with electricity. They send each other electrical impulses. And this is an actual image of a neuron. It's been injected with a fluorescent dye that binds onto some protein. I'm not an experimentalist, so I don't know exactly how it works, but you are actually looking at a blow up of a neuron. This is the cell body. And these arm-like extensions are dendrites that reach out to neurons nearby to communicate the electrical signals. So how is the heartbeat generated? Has anyone heard of a central pattern generator, a CPG? No, you didn't know. Okay, fine, good. So heartbeat and every other rhythmic activities that it is required to sustain life, such as respiration, is created and controlled by a very small, and when I say small, I mean about 10 or so neurons that work together. And that little group of 10 or so neurons is called a central pattern generator. That little group controls millions of other cells throughout the body. But the basic function, the basic heartbeat is controlled by this very, very tiny number. So importantly, after a CPG is stimulated electrically one time, it can generate continuous electrical output without the need for continued stimulation from the outside. Now, this is very useful. Think about this in terms of robustness. Imagine, as an analogy, imagine you had to eat continuously in order to stay alive. You couldn't stop for a second. That would not be very useful because you couldn't do anything else. So it's very useful to have this little contraption that can just go and go and go and go and go after one initial input. Where did the initial input come from? Did it come at birth? Where did it come from? That is a huge open question. That is a huge area of active research right now. And in all species, I said this, but I'll say it again because I wrote it down. CPGs underlie rhythmic behaviors required for survival, including heartbeat and respiration. And almost everything we know about CPGs comes from studies of very tiny animals, such as leeches. And unfortunately, the reason why almost all research comes from these animals is we don't really care if they die. That's the reason. We can do whatever we want to them, and it's legal. On the right here, on the right is pictured the 8-neuron CPG of the leech, governing the leech's heartbeat. So it's very boring, it's just a schematic. So each one of these black circles is a neuron. And each one of these straight lines from neuron to neuron is one of those arm-like extensions that you saw in a much more beautiful rendition in this picture. So let me squeeze that image down for a moment so I have more room here. And I want to show you what each of these neurons, each of these 8 neurons is doing. You can take an electrode and you can measure, you can puncture the cell membrane of each one of these 8 neurons, and you can record the change in voltage on the surface of each cell. So let me show you, for example, the first cell labeled number 1 up the top. This is a voltage, we call it a voltage trace or a voltage time series. So time is on the x-axis here. And we can watch in time, the voltage of cell 1 goes up and decays down slowly, up and decays down slowly, up, decays down slowly, etc. And you can measure individually the 8 neurons individually in the same manner. And each one's doing its own thing, but with the same basic rhythmicity. Neurons 2 and 6 and 4 and 8, it looks as though that blue region's just completely shaded in, but it isn't. It's actually that they're spiking up and down so quickly. You can see that right here. So neuron number 6, for example, is spiking up and down like that so fast that it looks as though that entire region is shaded in, but it isn't. And together, collectively, these 8 neurons collectively create that electrocardiogram that I showed you previously. I feel like I should pause for questions. Let me add one more thing. How is it that these 8 neurons are communicating in such a way to create such a robust output? Great question. I work on that. We don't understand it. Excuse me. The best research to date, or the most thorough research to date, studies 2 neuron and 3 neuron systems. The 2 neuron system is relatively easy to understand compared to the 3 neuron system, which has undergone at least 4 decades of research thus far. The 8 neuron system, I don't believe there's anybody who's tackled this problem, how the 8 neuron system is able to generate that robust pattern so reliably. It's each neuron you add adds something on the order of 10 to 20 synapses. The number of degrees of freedom in your problem increases hugely. And so it's a very, very difficult problem to tackle more than a two neuron network. Sorry,
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Can you just, in the schematic, so you said each of the circles is a neuron. Are the little black nodes that are on the circles, is that showing direction? Is that?
It is, yes.
Okay.
That's a good question. Oh, I'm sorry. Not necessarily direction, but excitatory versus inhibitory. I hadn't gone into that. I can explain that. If neuron 1 synapses onto neuron 2 in an excitatory manner, what that means is that if neuron 1 sends an electrical impulse to neuron 2, the result will be that neuron 2 then fires an impulse on. If, on the other hand, neuron 1 synapses inhibitively onto neuron 2, that means the effect of its impulse is to silence neuron 2. So I believe, you know what, I want to say that the synapses that end in the little dot are excitatory, and that the synapses that don't have a dot are inhibitory. I could have that reversed, actually. I'm not sure. It's either one or the other.
It's helpful either way. Thank you.
Professor, are the numbers associated with...
Call me Eve, don't call me that, please.
Oh, sorry. Hi, I'm Greg.
Hi.
You know, way back when, I'm a biologist. So is the numbering sequence here indicative of a potential firing sequence at all? Like, are we looking at the emergence of physical pattern that then becomes electrical pattern? Or are they just numbered for convenience?
No, they're just numbered for convenience.
Okay.
Yeah, the causality is very hard to pick out. For example, if neuron, let's say, okay, so if neuron 1 fires, it's gotten a message from either neuron 2 or neuron 3.
Right.
Yeah, but then neuron 2 and neuron 3 are also in communication with each other. So it's a very nonlinear problem to pick out who caused neuron 1 to fire. In fact, that might not even be a meaningful question.
Fair.
I don't know if that, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it sure does.
Okay.
Although it complicates my follow-on question, which is the EKG pattern you were showing. Is that the emergent property of sort of the sequential firing of groups of neurons within this CPG group?
Yes, exactly. So, yes, it is. So that the electrocardiogram pattern, that would be in real time with the output you see here. That would be in real time what you're measuring on the surface of a leech heart at the same time these neurons are doing their thing.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Every time I do this, I realize how I can improve my slide. I should put that underneath these time series here. Okay, any other questions? These are great. Thank you. I don't feel so alone.
You're not alone.
Oh, right. But wait, there's more. I thought we were on to astrophysics, but not quite yet. Nature has repeatedly hit upon this theme. And here's what I mean by that. CPGs are ubiquitous across multiple independent lines of evolution. Okay. Here, I am not a biologist, so I'm kind of out of my element describing this little schematic, but we see a fish evolving separately from a bird, for example, and the fish develops fins. It's evolved to swim through the water, whereas a bird has no fins. It's developed wings to fly through the air. But the CPG design, that is a tiny number, little cluster of neurons controlling millions, billions of others, evolved independently in those two creatures and in every creature that we have studied. Why? This is an active area of research. Possible guiding forces for why nature would hit upon the same scheme multiple times independently. It could be a stable configuration for self-sufficiency in an unstable environment. Remember, I noted that once you electrically stimulate the CPG one time, it can sustain that activity indefinitely. That's useful. Again, I said, what if you had to, as a kind of an example of how annoying it might be otherwise, what if you had to eat and drink water constantly? That is, the moment you stop drinking water, you would die. That would not be a recipe for success. Another possibility is metabolic efficiency. If only 8 neurons have to be active all the time to sustain your heartbeat, as opposed to having to rope in all 8 billion of them every single moment, that could be useful for energy conservation. Those are two prevailing ideas. Trying to
Can I ask it? Probably
Yeah.
a dumb question. Not being a biologist or a scientist of any kind, how do you know that they evolved independently?
Well, okay, so again, I'm not a biologist, but you take a crab and you take a bunny rabbit and you take a lizard, and by you, I mean you, the expert biologist, can chart where historically those species diverged. And so you must infer, and you can see that, you cut open the crustacean central nervous system, and you do the same with well, you probably don't do it with a bunny because there's going to be some some bunny rights activists out for your head. But you can examine that such a thing exists in animals that could not have biologically communicated with each other their plan at any previous point in their evolution.
Okay.
In other words, you're sure that the different groups did not inherit this from the last recent common ancestor of all those diverse groups?
Yes. And so here's a better answer. To trace back to the common ancestor, you trace back to before the central nervous system developed. Not all cells, for example, the amoeba has no central nervous system. Yeah. So by the time those groups diverged, so the groups diverged prior to the generation of the central nervous system within either of the 2 strains.
That I can understand that. Thank you.
Okay. Great. More questions? Let me just see how we're doing on, how are we doing on time? Oh, okay. Oh, well, yeah, that's fine.
We're good, about 25 after. But it's good because people are jumping in with questions along the way. There are times we have literally and no questions and then only discussion at the end. So you're great.
Okay. All right, great, fine. Let's switch gears. Let's move over to the universe. So unlike the neural network, where we are with our understanding of neuroscience now, we don't understand how the central pattern generators evolved the way they did. We think we do understand, however, the force underlying the formation of some structures in the universe. So let me, again, exit full screen. And I want to show you do you see a YouTube video that looks like a cube with a lot of blue inside it? Great. Okay, what I'm going to show you is the formation of large-scale structure in the universe. Shortly after the Big Bang, say within about 1 billion years after the Big Bang, we believe that the universe is about 14 billion years old. So this is quite early on. We call it the early universe. And what I want you to pay attention to is early, there's a lot of just diffuse blueness. And you're going to see the blue kind of condense into more well-structured shapes. And you will see black emerging as well as the blue areas become better defined. Let me play that for you one more time. And I had my laptop on mute through that because there's some corny music that goes along with it. Did you appreciate how so the blue diffuseness kind of clumps up and forms structure? And now let me show you, so early on, tiny fluctuations in the density of that blueness, which is the matter energy distribution in the universe, tiny fluctuations in density existed from place to place. That is, there's a slight enhancement of density here compared to this region over here. Now, the force of gravity is such that a tiny fluctuation in density, a tiny enhancement of density here is going to steal some matter from the less enhanced region over here. And it is in that way that tiny fluctuations grow. And let me now show you how that can happen on an even smaller scale. If we zoom way in to one of the tiny little blue specks in the top graphic, you can watch a solar system form. And now I'm going to start from the beginning of that video that I showed you about 10 minutes ago, where we have a very diffuse, cool blue cloud of gas. And in the center, there's an enhancement of density, and it's going to begin to rotate. Angular momentum is going to make it rotate, and the density is going to, or the matter distribution is going to grow more and more compact, and we're going to form a disk structure. And now we see what we saw in the beginning, where we have a star forming at the center, and we have dust gathering around it. But there will be enhancements of the dust here and there, and they are planetesimals. You can see them. They will become the planets. I believe those are all of the animations I have for you today. So go back to full screen mode. And there's more. Nature repeatedly hit upon this scheme too. Okay, so these structures, the galaxy, the solar system that I showed you, developed within independent regions of space. And here's what I mean by that. Has anyone seen this picture? This made headlines in 2003, I believe it was 2003. This is the cosmic microwave background. It is a picture, an infrared light, of the universe as a baby. This is an image of the universe as it looked like at age 300,000 years. And what you see here, so color codes for temperature. The dark blue is the coldest regions, the green are in the middle, and the hottest regions are the red. So the little red specks are where galaxies are forming. And what I mean by nature repeatedly hit upon this scheme is that take points A and B. I just stuck those points in myself. A is near a little red speck, which is where galaxies will be forming, and so is B. It's near several red specks. So galaxies, the same structures are forming at location A and at location B. And yet, at age 300,000 years, there hasn't been enough time for information from A to have reached point B. That is, A and B couldn't have gotten together and said, hey, let's make these galaxies. They independently hit upon it. And, sorry, Zoom's little bar is hiding the text. Oh, I think that's what I just said anyway, it's fine. Right, and we believe that the guiding force here is gravity. It's one of the fundamental forces of nature that pervades this entire region, which could explain how A and B independently hit upon the same idea, that they're governed by the same law. And in neuroscience, we're actually actively looking for something like this, an analogy to gravity in astrophysics. You know, what are the guiding laws that neuroscience obeys? So let me come back to my original images here. You may have guessed by now which is which. Anyone want to guess?
Left is neuro.
Yep.
That's what I think too.
Yep. Left is neuro, right is, okay, so left, these are neurons. So actually clusters of neurons with the dendrites reaching out to other clusters of neurons. And I want you to appreciate the spatial scale here. It's about a micron. It's about as thick as your fingernail. Not as wide as your fingernail, as thick as it, like a 1/10 of a millimeter. Okay. And we call, in neuroscience, we call this the small world architecture, where tiny clusters are all connected by just one or two little guys within each cluster. Whereas on the right, this is called the cosmic web in astrophysics. This is a map of dark matter in the universe. And the scale here, so cosmic web, small worlds basically mean the same thing. The scale here, so think of the distance to the sun. It takes 8 minutes for light to get to the sun. Light is 8 light minutes away from us. Multiply that by 1,000,000 and multiply that by 1,000,000. So that is the spatial scale on the right. And just one more thought, a final example from the world of humans. I love this example. A similar pattern exists in social networks. There's a whole research area on this. You've heard of 6 degrees of separation. I know Armand, who knows Amol, who knows Mary, who knows Joe, and Joe is Joe Biden. Oh, I'm separated from Joe Biden by just 6 people. And so in this cartoon here, you've got little clusters, a lot of people in one little closely knit group, but one of them happens to know this guy way over here in Australia or Antarctica or what have you. And we human beings invent patterns, right? We play music, we listen to music. Think of the things you do that kind of calm you down. You take a walk, you go for a swim, you hum, you chew gum. This rhythmicity somehow is just innate in us. And isn't that interesting? There, that's all. Thanks.
Wow, I love it.
It's fascinating. Thank you so much. I love it.
Welcome. Thank you so much.
Reminds me of like ideas that pop up in different parts of the world with no apparent connection. And there may really be connection. I don't know, but.
Oh yeah, I wonder if we didn't have so many different languages, and even within English, physicists think they're talking about something completely different from neuroscientists and from philosophers, and there are a lot of very similar themes going on. And if I love connections among seemingly disparate fields for that reason.
Yeah, well, one thing this makes me think about is all the research, maybe it's not new research, but it's sort of new to me research about fungal networks underground, like mycorrhiza, and the sort of like connections between trees and plants, and these sort of like major sort of huge, but similarly structured sort of networks of fungi. And so when I saw your pictures, that's the first thing that I thought about.
Oh, that's cool. So they're like secret networks underground that we don't, I don't know anything about that. Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and the research seems to show that like that communication, sort of chemical and electrochemical communication happens in these spaces too.
That reminds me, I know I met a woman at a physics of behavior workshop. She studies the behavior of plants.
Yes.
Yeah, you can, I'm kind of making this up. I only vaguely remember it, but some species of tree will protect each other against some other species of tree in the same forest.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I've read about that too.
Aspen trees are very, very well known for that. They have these incredible, if you see a side of a mountain covered in aspen trees, it's essentially one organism. It's a single organism. And they work together.
There's a book called The Secret Life of Trees.
How are they connected as a single organism? Is it chemicals, or is it the actual root system is shared?
I think it's both. So you want to see, you always want to see a large cluster of aspen, because that means it's a healthy group of aspen.
I see. So if there's one on its own, or you would never see one on its own?
You probably wouldn't know.
Only if somebody had planted it, and then it wouldn't last for a huge long time.
Oh, is that why you, so cherry, I'm suddenly thinking of cherry blossoms. I wanted to buy my sister a cherry tree for her birthday, but I have found that if you buy one alone, it will die very shortly. Same phenomenon there?
Well, that could also be male and female.
Male, female, yeah.
Yeah.
That could be an issue too. But mushrooms are like that, the fungi, the mushrooms. You can have these huge colonies of mushrooms that grow underground and they're all interconnected.
It also reminds me of murmurations of like starlings who are not physically connected to each other, but there's somehow almost one organism as
there's
they
a geometry
move.
to that. There's a geometry to that. So.
And they're obviously, connected in some way that is not physical because they're able to move together. I mean, they don't like all fly in different directions.
And Pam, when you say there's a geometry of it, I'm wondering, like, are there mathematical models that we know of that describe some of these things?
Yes.
Yeah. And Eve, are there some, related to what you've talked about?
Are there mathematical models? Is that your question?
Oh, Pam, you're muted. Sorry. I could tell Pam was still sharing some thoughts.
Oh, sorry.
You're
I
Yeah.
had a comment. This is Amber with Mark Hauer. I had a comment about the cherry trees. I'm not sure if it's that they'll die. I know with apple trees, if you don't have a different kind of apple tree, you won't get fruit because they will not self-pollinate and they will not pollinate with another tree from this that's of the same type. So in other words, if you have two golden delicious, they won't pollinate each other. You need to have something else in there. And I don't know if that's the case with cherry trees, but it could be, I don't know.
Okay.
So that was my comment.
Nice to meet you, Amber.
Eve, this is Carol up in the corner. I emailed you a question. How is any of the information you presented, is any of it applicable to humans?
I'm not sure in what sense you mean. So let's start with neuroscience. Well, it's believed that the central nervous system works basically the same way in all animals, but you don't get very far studying, the short answer to your question is yes. But most of the research is done on very, very small central nervous system animals. And that's for two reasons. The first reason is these animals, such as the leech, contain a handful of neurons that deal with a bowl. That is, for example, the central pattern generator that I showed you, the 8 neurons in the leech. We can actually stick, this is no small task, but we can actually electrically record simultaneously from those 8 neurons individually at the same time. Human CPGs, on the other hand, so our brains contain about 10 to the 9 neurons. So not only would it be a formidable task to try to ferret out where the CPG lies in us, it's also illegal. You can't do the things to a human being that you can do to a leech.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you. I never thought of it that way.
Oh, it's hard. So research is done on humans, volunteer subjects, but it's much less well resolved information, because what you do is you put electrodes on the surface of the skull. That's all you're allowed to do to a person. With one caveat, some people who are undergoing brain surgery, for example, for the removal of some section of the brain that's believed to be causing seizures, you can implant electrodes during the surgery with the permission of the patient, so long as it imposes no danger whatsoever to the patient. But those data pale, the amount of information you can extract from data like that pales in comparison.
Okay.
Sticking an electrode directly into a cell, which you can't do to people.
Right. Okay.
So the prevailing belief is that the central nervous system essentially works the same way. It's much more complicated in people, but that we can learn a wealth about how we work by studying how a crustacean or a leech works.
Oh, okay. I see. Okay. Thank you.
In terms of astrophysics, for me, it's just curiosity. I don't think I'm going to learn more about myself by studying the cosmos. I'm fascinated by how all this came to be.
Okay. Thank you. That
It
answers.
sounds like maybe you have learned about yourself that way, though. Or about all of us, I should say.
You mean how tiny we are?
Well, I mean, maybe you would have to. I don't want to tell you what you've learned, but it just sounds like something that I've taken away from this is the connections between the universe and the neuron network, and that tells me, or at least it makes me presume that there are other connections between us and other parts of the natural world.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think anyone studying cosmology or astrophysics wonders, how does consciousness arise from these little particles swarming around, right?
Yeah.
I don't study it. I don't think one difficulty is, where does the science end and where does the philosophizing begin? If it's not testable, it's not really science, right? They're fascinating ideas. I think there are people, string theorists, for example, I think Brian Greene might disagree with what I'm saying right now. I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about those things as a scientist because I don't see how I could get anywhere, if that makes any sense. But it is, it's a baffling concept to me that when I think about it, I never get anywhere. So I guess that's why I don't think about it. It's a baffling concept that, you start with a bunch of protons and neutrons in this vacuum, and you wind up with consciousness. What even is that? So I have no answer to that.
I was going to say, I saw Greg nodding along, and we have 2 library books at home. One is a Brian Greene book, I think something about the end of everything, and the other one is a Sam Harris book about consciousness. And one chapter of that'll just blow your mind, but it is interesting to take in a little bit at a time and then, think about all the things we've talked about today.
Sam Harris, I know Brian Greene's, I don't think I know the latter author you just mentioned. Sam Harris?
Sam Harris, is that the right one, Greg?
It is. So argumentative, atheistic, agnostic, or not even agnostic, but argumentative, atheistic philosopher type. But he definitely is tied into the science and acknowledges consciousness as, and I quote, the hard problem. And he puts his finger exactly where you are, which is to say that there is no fundamental guiding principle that says that when matter is organized just so, that self-awareness and consciousness should arise from it.
Right.
If there is a principle to that effect, we do not understand it. And because of the reductionist nature of how we ask questions in science, like you pointed out, is it testable, right? That the very origins of the question are sort of called onto the mat by the investigative process we might use to investigate them. So the origins and the development and the existence of consciousness are really very difficult scientifically for exactly the reasons you point out.
Mm-hmm.
So fascinating read if you get a chance.
What is the title of his book?
Let me go find it and I'll be right back. Hold that thought.
Okay, thanks.
Well, and Eve, before we go, I wanted you to end, if you don't mind, by, I feel like you've got this this innate interest in not only science, but in sharing science and making it understandable. And I'd love for you to tell us briefly about your theatrical troupe, your outreach in the community, and how you try to reach people, you know, in other ways besides your teaching to undergrads and graduates.
Oh, sure. My first love was theater. I've been writing little skits since I was 6 years old, and I was in all the school plays. I thought I wanted to be an actor, and I actually tried that after college and quickly decided I would also like to have health insurance and a roof over my head. So I went to graduate school. I think it's so important. I think it's important for any scientist to recognize that we have a responsibility to communicate with everybody about what science is. And in my experience, not many of my science colleagues are terribly interested in doing that. And not many of them are very good at presenting to audiences other than their fellow scientists. Let's see, I actually left graduate school in the middle of it because I missed theater so much, and I moved back to Manhattan and I started a theater company with my now husband. We met at an audition. And one of the things we did was we experimented with communicating science to audiences using comedy. So we would make satires of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle from quantum mechanics and have the audience laughing and not even really get that they were learning something. It was hard to market it. We wanted to be very careful not to say, oh, you're going to learn about physics. We didn't think that would be a very big, selling point, and we didn't want to do it that way anyway. So it was just a delight to have people laughing and realize that they were learning, realize after the fact that they'd absorbed something new or strange. Then I went back and finished grad school, and just in the interest of time, I dropped all of that. But now, in my position as a professor, I'm gradually starting it up again, and I joined the museum, and there's a lot of outreach that goes on there. I love it. I love it more than communicating with my fellow scientists. It's more fun. And I get new questions. You don't hear a lot of new things from your the little niche you're working in after the first few years of kind of getting the lay of the land. So, talking with people who are new to a subject, especially new students. So that's a big caveat. New students always offer me something new. But they force you to think in a new way. They force you to think about questions you haven't thought about before. So I love it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I also, when I was Googling you, when I first heard about your talk, and I stumbled upon your April 1st research, and I love that you've got this thing now that, how many years have you done April Fool's Day research?
So it's been 6 years. Every April Fool's I post, I write an article where the science is accurate, but it's the methodology is applied to an absurd purpose.
That's awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, March is my favorite month of the year. Every evening and every weekend in March, I just work on my article. I don't know what it'll be this year. Usually it's a topic I'm trying to force myself to learn. And if I know I get to make fun of it in the end, then I can stomach learning it.
That's a good approach. We'll have to remember to put this year in our email, Anne.
Yes, we'll keep an eye on what it is. Well, we've already gone about 5 minutes over. We tried to, Greg's found the book. He's put the title in the chat if anybody wants this book. We want to respect everybody's time, and Eve's especially for zooming in from New York City with us. And so Mariah, usually, unless anybody else has a final thought, she will usually toast us as a way to close for the day. And Eve, do you have any other last minute things to share?
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. This is the best thing that I do. It's an honor to do this. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing your time with us. You probably had never heard of Chestertown until I reached out, and it is really fun for us to have somebody with your background and talent share your thoughts with us. So thank you.
Thanks. I'd love to visit again.
Please do when we have a little bit less pandemic happening, we definitely would love to welcome you to our spaces here. And I can't tell you, I've been looking forward to this for ever since Anne sent me the email that said, oh my God, she said yes. So I'm really happy that you were able to do this, and come back anytime.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, and I'm so happy that we had all these other beautiful people here, and thank you all for coming and participating. And I think, so one of the things I heard, and I think I've said this before in our salons, earlier on in the pandemic, I heard a psychologist talking about, how people, are going to get through and what we need in order to sort of maintain our equilibrium through this difficult period. And he said people need novelty and structure. And so that's part of sort of how I think about these salons. We have them at the same time each week. We have, kind of a similar pattern to how they work, but we have a different topic every week and different guests. And so we have a little novelty and a little structure. And hearing your talk, Eve, made me think about that, because you're talking about these structures that are similar in the universe and in our bodies and our minds, and then we were talking about the similar kinds of structures under the earth in the mushroom networks, and then you're talking about comedy, which is all about novelty. And so I think that your approach is one that I really love and appreciate, and I think I would just like to toast to novelty and structure in our lives. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eve.
Thank you,
all.
everybody. Mariah, that was so kind of you to say. Thank you. Thank you, Anne, for the invitation. This has been a ton of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, please
all.
come back.
Yeah.
I
Have
will.
a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.